Right. Hello, Good Mood Foundation's participants. This is our first question and answer. I had a couple of questions come in, mostly about our nutrition lesson, which is to be expected. And the questions are largely around protein consumption, which is also to be expected because it's difficult to get protein. I think it's one of the toughest of the macronutrients to get in the diet. And the question was about estrogen dominance. So picking the right protein source, how do you know that you're getting a protein source that's not going to influence your hormone levels? And I assume that the underlying assumptions of that question are that things like tofu and soy can increase estrogen, potentially causing something called estrogen dominance and leading to breast cancer. And that the other underlying assumption is that animal products can also do the same. Because a lot of my patients will come in with the assumption, they'll say things like, "Oh, I'm plant-based because I'm worried that the hormones in meat are going to affect my hormones." Now, we'll talk about that. Now, in the second lesson, in the circadian rhythm section, there are a list of YouTube videos I've done related to female hormones like estrogen and progesterone, and things like estrogen dominance is covered under there. And then you have the perfect period tracker or the perfect period manual as a bonus in that section. So we're not diving into hormones necessarily as part of this foundational program, but there is a lot of mention of it. And there are lots of things you can do for your hormones within the context of this program. And one of those things is increasing the amount of protein you're consuming, regulating your blood sugar, regulating your HPA axis, and thereby regulating your reproductive hormones and your periods if you're a menstruating person. So now it's important to think of protein. I like to tell people to get about 90 grams of protein a day. And in the slideshow and in the in the Mood Diet ebook is a list of the foods that typically contain the most amount of protein. So if you eat a serving of this food, you're going to get somewhere between 15 to 20 grams of protein. We're trying to aim for about 90 a day. That's a rough benchmark that I mostly put to my patients, because when we have blood sugar imbalances that lead to low energy mood, HPA axis dysfunction, hormone imbalances, it's often a lack of protein or protein malnutrition that drives a lot of that. And a lot of us could benefit from more protein. And the higher we aim, the higher we're probably going to hit that 90-gram mark. When we're trying to reset and regulate our HPA axis in order to do all of those, to regulate all of those symptoms like energy, mood, sleep, aiming for a bit higher protein than the recommended daily allowance, the RDA will suggest, is a bit better, I find. So we're going to, with this Q&A, do a little bit of an interactive exercise. I'm going to show you some Instagram accounts and we're going to take a look at what we could add to optimize them. But first, I want to address this idea of estrogen content in foods. So I found this is the source of this infographic. I'm just going to share my screen here. The source of this infographic is the cattle industry, so it's not necessarily unbiased. So I just want to put out that disclaimer. But you can look and see what the estrogenic activity of different foods is and compare that with the amount of estrogen that a woman at different stages in her life will have in her body. So you have something like soy flour, which contains like over 300,000 nanograms per estrogen. I believe this is in 100 grams of the food. So you're probably, eating 100 grams of soy flour is quite a lot. And then you have a pregnant woman, which is the most estrogen any woman will have in her life, is around 19 million nanograms of estrogen in her body. So soy flour would have the highest amount of estrogenic activity, and we'll come back to this. Something like pinto beans, 400,000. White bread, interestingly enough, has over 100,000. Peanuts has about over 40,000. Eggs have a couple hundred nanograms. And then you have beef. Implanted beef means that they've added hormones, and non-implanted means more aligned with grass-fed meat where they haven't added hormones. Know that in Canada, it's not legal to they don't add hormones to meat or milk. And so all of our animal products would be non-implanted. And there you have about 2 nanograms. So compared to soy, it's millions, hundreds of millions of times less estrogenic activity. Now, I'm not advocating for like industrial meat consumption. There's, and I'm also not advocating necessarily for beef consumption. I believe you can definitely go towards more vegetarian sources of protein. Probably the best diet has a combination of animal and non-animal protein sources. Also, soy, so it does have estrogenic activity, right? And so a lot of us are thinking, okay, well, if soy has estrogenic activity, then it can probably contribute to breast cancer. But it's important to know that all of the research shows that soy is actually protective against breast cancer. And the reason is that the phytoestrogens, so what the estrogenic activity of these foods means is that they likely contain phytoestrogens. So these are chemicals in the plant, naturally occurring chemicals that attach to estrogen receptors in our bodies that our body recognizes as estrogen. But these phytoestrogens are weaker than our actual estrogen, typically. And so we don't get the full effects. And so that can actually have a protective effect in our body for a couple of reasons. If we have high levels of estrogen, the phytoestrogens bind to our receptors and block all that estrogen. And then our body's like, oh, there's all this estrogen floating around in our blood, in our circulation, and it starts to upregulate estrogen clearing pathways in the liver and in the gut and get rid of it. So it can actually be protective in that regard. And the other end, if you have low estrogen, so maybe you're dealing with perimenopause or you're dealing with PMS or you're fully menopausal, your estrogen levels are low, the phytoestrogens can bind to the receptors and produce some estrogen-like effects. It's almost acting like a natural form of hormone replacement therapy. So there's this idea, it's called selective estrogen receptor modulation, SERM, S-E-R-M, where the phytoestrogens actually balance out the natural estrogen in our body. And a lot of plants have a lot of compounds that do this with our hormones, not just estrogen, but other hormones like cortisol. There's, compounds in herbs like licorice or other adaptogenic herbs can regulate our hormonal levels. So plants have this really interesting ability to talk to our hormones and balance them out. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. Now, there can definitely be food sensitivities in here, like you might be sensitive to eggs or to dairy or to soy, or you might prefer to not eat certain animals or any animals at all. And so that's a little bit more individualized. And I think we talk about that in the nutrition, at the end of the nutrition lesson, that, okay, that's maybe the time that you reach out and work one-on-one to dial in your specific diet and how you can get the protein. Now, if you focus on the protein in the mood diet, it's very likely that you'll be able to get enough there. And I wouldn't worry too much about estrogenic activity of foods, because what we see in the research is that the estrogenic activity of real food, so natural food, is likely. So something like in meat, it's negligible, and in something like soy, it might actually be protective, especially if you're consuming whole foods, unprocessed. Now, xenoestrogens, so I'm just going to stop screen sharing. Xenoestrogens are chemical compounds like things like BPA and phthalates, and so things that have been added to food or that are in the chemicals in our environment that attach to our estrogen receptors, and they behave a little bit differently. They don't necessarily have protective effects, and there's a lot of theories that these are causing the increased incidence of breast cancer and other female hormonal conditions. So that's something different. And so again, the emphasis is on eating real, unprocessed foods, ingredients that you can understand, that kind of thing. I just read a study on the microbiome that showed that emulsifiers like polysorbate 80, which if you're buying coconut milk in the can and you look at the ingredients, some brands contain polysorbate 80, whereas other brands don't. So you always want to make sure you're buying coconut milk that just contains water and coconut, and avoid all of those emulsifiers. They put those in just to make sure that the water and coconut always stays consistent. So if you are not horrified by the fact that, the coconut meat separates from the coconut water, you don't mind doing a bit of stirring, you save yourself a lot of grievance from having to consume polysorbate 80, which this study was showing affects the microbiome. And through affecting the microbiome, it can lead to obesity, metabolic issues, and gut inflammation. So these chemical compounds, we don't exactly know how they affect us, but if you can't pronounce it or recognize it, it's likely that your gut and your body can't either. So staying away from, chemical additives and preservatives and those kind of things is a good idea, and consuming real whole foods. And then in that way, I wouldn't worry too much about the estrogenic activity of foods. I wanted to show you some Instagram accounts. So I just looked at hashtag vegan, and I'm not against the vegan diet at all. I think plant-based is actually a very good and very healthy diet, but I always think of it as like plant-based, so the base of your diet is plants. So maybe 80-90% of your diet comes from plants, and then the other 10-20% could come from animals. Or if you are completely plant-based, then none of it comes from animals. But in that case, then you really need to replace what we get easily from, or more easily from, animals, and more difficultly from plants, with very strategic a plant-based replacements, and that could be difficult. And so that is, again, where I would suggest working one-on-one. All right, so we have this very exciting Instagram account where, well, it's an Instagram hashtag, vegan recipes, hashtag vegan recipes. And so all of these look really delicious, really colorful, really beautiful. So we know they're very high in micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, complex carbohydrates, fiber, all of that really good stuff, right? And also a plant-based diet contains all of the good fats, olive and avocado and nuts and seeds and coconut. So you're missing fish oil, you're missing vitamin D, which even in supplement form comes from sheep's wool. So there isn't really a vegan vitamin D. You're missing B12, which can be replaced for sure. You're missing zinc and iron and potentially copper and choline. And so there's a lot of nutrients that are quite much lower in a completely plant-based diet. You're not going to get a lot of collagen. Getting all your amino acids is difficult. And the big one is protein. So if we look at this delicious looking thing, so you have different vegetables, and you have a miso dressing, and then you have potatoes. So this looks delicious. I would love to eat this. But I think you can all look at it and be like, okay, well, where is that quarter plate filled with a protein food? So adding something like black beans, or adding like a combo of chickpeas and quinoa or buckwheat, or adding even some tofu could help just round out this meal. So, consuming this will probably make you feel full when you eat it. And then in 1 or 2 hours, because blood sugar will struggle to stay steady, blood sugar will go up, and then the fiber will make it such that the blood sugar is not going to skyrocket and then crash, but you're probably not going to be sustained after eating this, and then wonder why you're craving chips or salty food or ice cream or something afterwards. And this is something I see time and time again, where and because the effect happens a few hours later, it's difficult to figure out that cause and effect, which is usually where my job comes in, and figuring out like, okay, every time your meal is protein deficient, you're craving food in the evening. And then the worst part is that you're blaming yourself and thinking it's about your willpower, or that you have a binge eating disorder, or that you're emotionally eating. And really, it's just because you needed more protein in your dinner or your lunch or your breakfast. Although this looks really good. Or, so a full day of eating vegan, again, like really healthy plant-based foods. So the main protein source in the breakfast would be oats, which only have about 5 grams of protein. PB milk, I think, is peanut butter milk. So again, probably not going to have much protein. So in this entire meal, you're maybe going to get 7 grams of protein. So to add more, you could add some vegan protein powder. You could add a little bit more nut butter, well, a lot more nut butter actually. And you could add collagen powder if you're not vegan. Collagen powder would probably fit really well in that, because it just kind of increase the consistency, but it won't change the taste. And a couple tablespoons of collagen powder will get you 10 grams more of protein. It's good for the gut. It's calming for the body. It's good for skin and hair. It's good for joints, and it doesn't really add much to the taste. And so that's a really great thing you could add to oatmeal. Yeah, in lunch they're doing tempeh, so they're probably getting enough protein in there as long as there's enough. And then for dinner, the main protein would be the hummus. So, and then you're going to get a little bit from whole grain toast. So if they could add something like turkey breast, or if you want to stay vegan, again, maybe like adding some protein powder in water to go with your sandwich for dinner. Um, you know, Also the thing with sandwiches is that it's hard to really pack it full of enough veggies that it would look like a quarter plate. Like if you laid all the ingredients of your sandwich out on a plate, would you be getting half of your plate of veggies? Probably not, right? Because it won't fit between the two slices of bread. So a better way to do it might be to serve the bread on the side like toast, have a big salad, and then throw your protein in the plate or eat it on top of the bread. So maybe like like 3 eggs, or a couple eggs plus hummus, with some avocado, and then all your veggies, and then maybe some toast. So like the veggies are spilling out of the sandwich and you have a little bit of salad on the side type thing. And then the last one, yeah, so a pasta plate, which is a really popular thing to do. So you have pasta, and then you have a ton of veggies, and then you're probably eating olive oil and all these other good fats with that. So really delicious looking good meal. And how you could tweak this is, instead of using I don't know what kind of pasta they're using. Oh, so here they're using chickpea penne. So yeah, just picking a legume pasta. So picking a pasta that's made with a base of lentils or chickpea, and trying to get one that contains about 20 grams of protein a serving. And there are many of these like that. And it's so easy because it's just as easy as making regular pasta. Um, and it's vegan and it's plant-based, and they're pretty pure. They usually just contain the legume flour. Um, and yeah, and then you get all of your protein and you get to eat this delicious thing, and you feel super full and you feel really nourished, and you get all the fiber. It's really good for blood sugar. So it's a great hack, and you can just have a ton of these legume pastas in your cupboard. So when you're in a pinch, grab some frozen broccoli, grab some frozen avocado. Even there's a recipe I think in the Mood Diet with the avocado sauce, and you can throw together pasta. So some ideas here. And I wanted to also talk about Chronometer. So if you feel like, so this is sort of like level 3. So you've done your tracking, or you're doing your tracking where you have your healthy fats, your produce, and your protein at every meal and snack, or you're at least tracking whether you've done that or not. If you want to take this a level up, you can start actually tracking your protein on something like Chronometer. I use Chronometer, but MyFitnessPal, I believe, lets you see your micro and macronutrients. Now, I would highly suggest not looking at the rest of the data on Chronometer, so not looking at your calories, or, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see micronutrients, but I would avoid looking at calories because I think we can get hung up on that, and then it just starts to drive this restriction mindset that I'm trying to move you away from. But one of the really eye-opening things, especially if you're combining foods, so in the Mood Diet and in the nutrition lessons, I talk about protein, like here are foods that are high protein that you could use as a protein serving. But the reality is that if you eat foods like quinoa and buckwheat that they don't necessarily contain that 20 grams of protein a serving, but you could combine that with broccoli or oats or a little bit of edamame, and you're combining several protein foods together to get that 20 grams or 30 grams in your meal. That's another way you can do it. It's a little bit more complicated though, because it might require tracking or really understanding how much protein is in all the food you're eating. But it can be a really eye-opening process. And I often have patients who are struggling to get enough protein track their protein for a week or even just a couple days. Try and push their protein amount a little bit higher to try and get closer to 90 grams and just see how they feel. And this is the idea of creating a cause and effect relationship where we understand this association between what we're doing and how we feel, which is not always that easy because we're used to feeling a certain way right after we do something, not a few hours or days afterwards. So it's through tracking that you can start to develop that relationship and understanding of, oh, when I eat like veggies and potatoes, like that first vegan meal we saw, I feel good right after, but in an hour or two, I feel hungry. Or if I don't put fat or protein in my smoothie and just do kind of a fruit and veggie smoothie, I feel hungry in an hour, versus when I put enough avocado or nut butter or coconut milk or protein powder, I feel good. So with Chronometer, You create an account, it's free, and you can put in your foods just like a MyFitnessPal thing. So I already pre-put in some foods. So like chickpeas, for example. So a can of chickpeas or a cup of chickpeas, sorry, rinsed and drained. So you can look down here and see, so it's really cool. It shows you all the vitamins and everything. Now know that it doesn't necessarily mean you're absorbing all these things, right? It tells you the fats. And then you can see how much protein. So a cup of chickpeas is only about 10 grams of protein. So, and then chickpeas, 34 grams of carbs, which is good. So it's a good complex carb, but it's more of a carb, right? Chickpeas. So you would want to combine chickpeas with something else, maybe. And then you have your oats, like half a cup of dried oats would make you a cup of oatmeal. So here you've got about, again, like 5 grams of protein. You can see all the amino acids as well if you're getting everything. And so it's not a complete protein, but it has quite a few of the main amino acids, or the essential amino acids. Then you have something like hemp seeds. So 2 tablespoons of hemp seeds. So some people will be like, oh, I throw hemp seeds in my smoothie or hemp seeds in my oats for my protein. So again, you're only getting about 6 grams for 2 tablespoons of hemp seeds. So you could do like 1 cup of hemp seeds. Whoops. And you can see what that would do. So it would be like a third of your calories. Again, we're not looking at calories, but it's quite a large amount of food. And then you get 50 grams. Okay, so half a cup or a third of a cup of hemp seeds will give you a serving of protein, right? But let's say we look at cod. So Atlantic cod, about 4 ounces, which would be like a fillet of cod. And so here we have 25 grams of protein, right? So we see that animal protein is just like a simpler, more pure form of protein. And I don't mean pure in a good way. It's just that it's mostly protein, cod, right? There's not a lot of fat in it, and there's not a lot of carbs. There's a few micronutrients like some B vitamins, but that's about it. Whereas plant foods contain more of a combination of different things. So if we're looking at this, we've pretty much consumed the day's worth of food, and then the protein for the day is 123 grams. So it's pretty good. I mean, we haven't had any fruits and vegetables or anything. It's not really like a day's worth of food. I just threw a bunch of different foods in there. So like you have brown rice, for example, only has, again, about 5 grams of protein. And then edamame, a cup of edamame, contains 18 grams. So that's pretty good. So you could definitely use edamame as a protein source, or combine edamame and chickpeas in your salad if you wanted a plant-based protein. The other thing I'll say about estrogen dominance and protein-rich foods is that the legumes can help with estrogen dominance because they can help. So anything with soluble fiber, like flaxseed and oats, can bind up estrogen in the gut and encourage the healthy elimination of estrogen from the body, because the body, once it's used up the estrogen it needs, it gets rid of it. And so any kind of fiber, legumes, or soluble fibers like from flax and oats can help just move the estrogen through the body and help with the natural elimination process. We have something called the estrobolome. So it's how the microbiome interacts with estrogen. And there's so much about the microbiome that we don't understand, but what we do understand is that it loves fiber and kind of hates processed chemicals. So the more fiber, the more whole foods, the better. So legumes have that extra benefit as well. So chickpeas, maybe a cup of chickpeas is not enough for all of the protein you need for that meal, but it can actually add benefit to helping with estrogen elimination and healthy hormone balance. The other question, so you can check out Chronometer. Just go to chronometer.com, make an account, and you can just track your food for a couple days even, and just see how that plays out, how much protein you're getting. Try and aim for 90 grams. Many of my patients will say like, oh yeah, you know what, I tracked for a week and I'm getting like 30 grams a day. And that's why I'm craving alcohol and popcorn, and I'm exhausted at the end of the day, and I can't make decisions, and I'm irritable, and So it's a real eye opener. And then when you try and push your protein, some people don't feel good with 90 grams a day. Some people are like, you know what, it's too much. I feel like I'm bloated. It's just way too much protein for me. But I'm eating 70 grams a day. And that seems to be the sweet spot for me, where I feel more emotionally level. I feel like I have more energy. I feel like I want to exercise. I naturally am motivated to exercise. I have less pain and less inflammation, and I have less cravings, and everything just feels really good. So, it's something you can do. You definitely don't have to. You can just stick with with the workbook, the booklet, and just focus on tracking your fats and your produce, and whether or not you had a protein serving at a meal or snack. But if you really want to dial it in more and focus more on it because you're already getting benefit, and you're like, okay, I want to take this a step further, this is something you can do. And you can just do it for a couple of days. The last question I had, the second question, was about sweeteners. So how do you add sweeteners to your food or make your food taste better? So the sweet taste typically comes from the quick dissolving or quick digestible carbohydrates, and more specifically fructose. And fructose is a simple sugar like glucose, that the liver then processes into glucose. So fruit is sweet because it contains fructose. Sucrose, table sugar, is sweet because it contains glucose and fructose stuck together. So your body breaks that apart, uses the glucose right away for energy or stores it as fat, processes the fructose to make glucose and uses that for energy or stores it as fat. High fructose diet tends to lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver. But again, is that fructose from fruit? Probably not. It's probably fructose from high fructose corn syrup from pop. And it's probably also related to polyunsaturated fats, those processed polyunsaturated fats that we discussed in lesson 1, things like corn oil and soy oil and things like that, that affect cell membranes, that clog up the liver, asking it to process all this stuff. Create more inflammation because of the rancidity and that kind of thing. So you're probably not going to get non-alcoholic fatty liver from fruit, particularly if you're regulating your blood sugar by eating healthy fats, anti-inflammatory fats, and fiber. So the best way to sweeten something is to add fruit to it, whole fruit. So in baked things, you can add applesauce. You can add, if your smoothie is not sweet enough, adding half a banana to a whole banana will fix the problem. Adding a little bit more berries, because sometimes, the smoothie recipes that I have in the mood diet, sometimes the berries is just not sweet enough. Like just adding a cup of blueberries. I've made a few smoothies over the last few days that taste very healthy. Let's just put it that way. And they just had frozen blueberries, and the protein powder didn't have stevia in it. I was just using collagen powder for my protein, and it was not delicious. I have to admit. So adding a banana can solve that problem, or more berries can fix that. Adding honey and maple syrup are also good sweeteners. They're more like high fructose sweeteners. They don't have the fiber in them. Are they better than table sugar? Yes, because they have a little bit more nutrients as a whole food. They have a little bit more vitamins. Blackstrap molasses is a source of iron, not an amazing source of iron, but it is a source of plant-based iron. So again, you have to eat like a cup of it to get enough iron, but it has some iron in it, which is the point. And then when you're doing baked things, adding like applesauce and things like that could be really helpful, because you get the fiber, or adding banana to sweeten things, you get the fiber, you get all of the whole food benefits and the sweetness as well. And then, so people asking about stevia. Not everyone is a fan of the taste of stevia. So non-caloric sweeteners, like, you have the chemical version like aspartame and Splenda, like these kind of things like sucralose and aspartame. So all the sweeteners act a little bit differently. It's hard to, they studied them in mice. Mice don't respond the same way that we do. What they find is that those sweeteners don't raise your blood sugar, but they potentially could raise insulin. So your body thinks that it's gotten sugar and it responds in kind, but then you get a hypoglycemic reaction. You get insulinogenic effects from it, as if you'd had sugar. So the body responds hormonally as if it had had sugar, and then those sweeteners can affect the microbiome as well. So they're not great. It's better to avoid them. Stevia It's hard to say. I don't know if stevia has insulinogenic properties. I think it's hit or miss in the literature. But stevia is a naturally occurring non-caloric sweetener. Same with monk fruit, erythritol. Although erythritol is a sugar alcohol, so non-caloric, just like xylitol, which can cause bloating in people who are sensitive to it. No, it's not necessarily bad bloating, or it's not necessarily bad for the microbiome, but it can be pretty terrible if you have IBS. So again, it's more individualized advice and nuance to figure out if that's a thing that you want to add to your food. So things like monk fruit stevia are sweeteners that you could use that don't add any calories or actual sugar. Not everybody likes the taste of stevia. Unfortunately, a lot of protein powders or healthy foods that are processed contain stevia. And so I would say the best way to sweeten something. So actually, the best thing to do is to decrease your need for sweet and encourage your preference or your palate for bitter foods. In Ayurveda, we have 6 tastes, and in Chinese medicine, 5 tastes, 5 flavors. And the more we can access all of those flavors, and in North America, we typically are consuming more sweet, because even rice in Chinese and medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, are considered sweet. We tend to consume more sweet and salt, and not enough bitter and astringent foods. So dark leafy greens are bitter foods, radicchio, burdock, like these kind of more bitter tasting foods help actually teach the palate to not need so much sweetness. So the more we can decrease the amount of sweet we need, the better. But if you do need more sweet, I would just add fruit, a little bit of extra fruit, whole fruit to things. All right, everyone. So that is our first Q&A. Let me know what you think. Send me more questions if you have them, and I'll compile them all in the next weekly video. I'm so excited that you're doing this program. You deserve it. And I'm really excited about all the feedback I've been getting about people feeling more energy, motivated, learning a whole bunch. So I really want to make this a great experience for you. So let me know what I can do for you, and have a great week.